Okay, I'm thrilled to introduce our next speaker, Lori Baker. Lori currently serves as the statewide Housing and Employment First Coordinator in the Office of the Secretary of the Illinois Department of Human Services, so DHS. In her role as statewide housing coordinator, she's responsible for the implementation of 2 Section 811 project-based rental assistance program awards, partners with community service agencies throughout Illinois to support access to affordable housing for persons with disabilities and older adults, and partners with various state agencies to facilitate a comprehensive approach to increasing housing stock and pathways into community housing, which is what we all want, community housing. In her role as Employment First Coordinator, Lori is responsible for the DHS Employment First initiative, and she works across the IDHS divisions to create Employment First philosophy and framework. We truly appreciate her making the trip up today from Springfield. Please help me welcome Lori Baker.
Thank you very much. How close do you have to stand to this to hear me? Can you hear me? All right. I'm going to try to talk slow because I'm a fast talker, but if I get to rambling too quickly, raise your hand and I will slow down. I have a kind of simplified version of the housing world that I'm going to talk about today because it's a very complicated system, just like many of the systems that you're seeking to get services from. So I want to make sure that you have the basic understanding. You have a copy of my PowerPoint in your packet, so you can take notes on that. Also at the back of that PowerPoint is information about how to contact me. So if questions come up afterwards, or you think of something that you want to know about, or you have some question or want to have a discussion about your particular situation, please feel free to contact me via email or by phone. And I really appreciate all of you being here on what is like one of the first beautiful Saturdays when we all should be out picking up the sticks and mowing our yard. So I appreciate you giving up your time to come here. I'm going to start out with a really basic question for people. Have people here ever heard of the term supportive housing? Anybody? Yeah, good. We've got some people in the audience, but just for those of you who don't know, supportive housing at its very minimum is affordable housing in the community, that you have a lease in your own name, you have rights of tenancy, you have tenant responsibilities, you lease from a landlord that's affordable to you, usually with a rental subsidy or some kind of funding that has made the property affordable for people with low income, coupled with the supportive services that you want and need in order to live integrated in the community. And it's very simplest. There's all kinds of fancy things about, you know, whether it's scatter site or single site or all these different other, is it, you know, master leased, is it this or that? But at its core, supportive housing is affordable housing plus the services and supports that you need as a person with a disability to live your best life in the community of your choice. So this has been a housing option for years and years and years in in several of our different systems, and has not really been offered to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities because our system has been overly reliant on community integrated living arrangements or kind of shared housing and institutionalization, unfortunately. So as I came to the state of Illinois 3 years ago from the Supportive Housing Providers Association, I began to be really lucky to be engaged with the intellectual and developmental disability service system world and advocacy world, and began to work on how we could make sure that this was an option and an opportunity for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. There are lots of different types of affordable housing, right, that could be the affordable part of the supportive housing. One of those options are your local public housing authorities, or PHAs as people call them for short. There are more than 100 around the state of Illinois. In the Chicagoland area, there's probably about 20, depending upon what county and what city you live within the county. Those housing authorities usually have a couple of different kinds of affordable housing options. They have what are called public housing units, which are buildings that the Public Housing Authority has gotten money from the federal government to create, that they've gotten to build, and that are affordable because of getting the money from Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development for people with lower incomes. And you know, they're kind of scattered around. They're usually integrated within communities. Sometimes there are buildings that are for persons that are of a certain age and or have a disability, or there are buildings that are for just people that have the need for an affordable housing unit. The other kind of resource that some public housing authorities have is called Housing Choice Voucher. Many people might know of it as a Section 8 voucher. That is a rental subsidy that people can be awarded a Housing Choice Voucher from the Housing Authority that they can then use to go to any rental property within their jurisdiction of the Housing Authority and rent a unit that is the size that they need and in the location that they want. And the person would pay 30% of their adjusted gross income towards the rent, and the Housing Choice Voucher would pay the difference up to fair market rent on behalf of the person straight to the landlord. The problem with any affordable housing resource is that there is much more demand than there is supply for affordable housing resources in general. And specifically, public housing authorities often have a very long waiting list, or they don't even have an open waiting list that you can apply for. So it can be kind of complicated, but part of the like, what do I need to do if I'm considering housing in the community? Part of what I have to do is get on every waiting list that I can possibly get on as a potential tenant in the community areas where I'm interested in living, because it's kind of like the lottery. It's the affordable housing lottery. If you don't play, you don't win, and you got to play a lot in order to enhance your chances to win that affordable housing lottery and get access to affordability. There is a HUD resource locator, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. You can go into your app store, either Apple or Android has it for free. You can download it onto your phone or your tablet in order to look at affordable housing resources in your community area. It uses your GPS. You know, in your phone, if you allow it to, and you download the app in order to show you options that are in your community. Because one of the other complicating factors with affordable housing is that a lot of properties run their own individual waiting lists. So not only could you get on a public housing authority's waiting list, but you could get on individual property that are affordable housing waiting lists. So that HUD locator is the first time that they've ever come out with this type of app from the federal government. It's their first attempt at trying to help us find resources that are around us that we might not know about, right? That we might not have seen an ad in a paper, or we might not know where those properties are at. So go down and download that app. If you don't want to download it, you can use it on your desktop computer by just simply searching for HUD Resource Locator. You'll just have to select the state and then the community areas that you're interested in seeing the results from, because it won't be able to use a GPS, right? So that is a kind of new available resource, newish. It's been around for probably about 10 months now, but I just try to encourage people to use it because there's never been the option before, and it's been a lot more complicated to try to find what affordable housing resources HUD has out there, because you know, they have properties, to get into the weeds and to go back to Mr. Roskam's analogy of putting your head in a bucket. There are single properties that have affordability that don't show up through a public housing authority. And so this is your chance to look at a lot of those options that HUD helps pay for. One of the things that I help manage is what's called the Statewide Referral Network, or SRN. This is a program of affordable housing, supportive housing options that is financed through the State Housing Finance Agency, which in Illinois is called the Illinois Housing Development Authority, or we call it IDA for short, IHDA. whenever I first started working in the housing arena, people kept talking about Ida, and I kept thinking, I really need to meet this person. She is so smart and so involved in all of these things about housing. And then I, go home and Google, Ida, and I realize, oh, Ida is the acronym for the Illinois Housing Development Authority. So there are no dumb premise, right? There's no silly question to ask, because there's lots of jargon and all kinds of, acronyms and everything that goes with all of this, accessing whatever type of service that you're seeking for you or your loved ones. So, never be afraid to ask those questions. But the Illinois Housing Development Authority gets what are called low-income housing tax credits. It's actually an IRS program that is the largest creator of affordable housing across the nation. And that low-income housing tax credits are awarded to the Illinois Housing Development Authority, who puts together a process for affordable housing developers to apply for those tax credits. And then what they do, if they're awarded those tax credits, they sell those and use the money to create the property that they have been approved to receive the tax credits for. So that's a really simplified version of what LIHTC is. So Ida, a few years back in about 2007, 2008, they wanted to increase the supportive housing resources that were available across the state of Illinois. And so they began to, within that application process for these low-income housing tax credit units, they began to incentivize or give extra points within it for people who would agree to set aside 10 to 20% of the entire project units as statewide referral network units or supportive housing options. Since that time, we have developed about 1,400 units around the state of Illinois that are statewide referral network units. I'm going to talk in a second about how people access the waiting list for those units, but the another web-based kind of resource that we have in the state of Illinois is our State of Illinois Housing Locator. That's this www.ilhousingsearch.org. And that's a public website that anybody can go in and search for housing opportunities in specific areas. You can filter what's on that waiting list. If you're a landlord, you can put available properties that you have on that waiting list for free. But embedded within that is information that about our statewide referral network units and a waiting list in order to gain access to those statewide referral network units. So what happens is we attempt to connect through our waiting lists people to the units that need the supportive housing affordable unit with the person who has the services and supports that they want in order to live in their community. So it's service providers. It's not a self-referral kind of waiting list. And what we encourage in terms of people who are could put your loved one or yourself on the waiting list is your individual service coordination entity, because they're the folks that you're sitting and planning what you want your future to look like, what services you're interested in, and so they should be the folks that are able to connect you or your loved one onto our statewide referral network waiting list. Now, I will say that there are ISC agencies that are better at this, and there are ones that are not as quick to adopt the process. So if you have any challenges when you go to your ISC agency in them not knowing what you're talking about or having any questions, you can refer them to me. You have my contact information, and we will make sure that they understand. I've done multiple trainings to ISC organizations, but again, some are quicker to adopt some things than others, so it just depends upon where you go for your ISC services. The folks that are eligible for the statewide referral network are a head of household with a disability or experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness, and you have to be at 30% of area median income or below. So low income is what is also required to have access to these statewide referral network units. Like I said, we have about 1,400 units, but we have new units coming online every day. We're right now in the beginning of prime building season, so spring, summer, fall, we'll have another about 200 plus units come online. And then we have turnover units every month, usually between 30 and 50 every month, in order to match, people have moved out, and so they're looking for another referral source to that property. The way that this is done within our waiting list is based on where the potential tenant states that they want to live. So, when your ISC agent is putting information into the waiting list about your potential tenant, they're going to ask some basic questions about what county you want to live in, or counties, what cities within those counties you're interested in. And I know we're kind of out in the suburbs, but if somebody selects Chicago is where they're interested in living, we also want to know what of the 77 community areas within Chicago you're interested in living in, because we want to offer you opportunities where you want to live. When we make those matches, we take information about the unit that is available and run it against the waiting list. So we're going to run it based on the features of the unit. So if the unit's in Highland Park and it's a 2-bedroom and it has accessibility features, we're going to filter off to the side anybody who doesn't want to live in a 2-bedroom with accessibility features in Highland Park and come up with our waiting list for that particular unit. And then offer those people on the waiting list the opportunity to decide whether they want to be referred to the property or not. That is totally, we want, this is personal choice. This is where you want to go. So you might want to live in Highland Park, but you might not want to live on the street where this address of this property is. So you can always say no when you get offered the opportunity to refer. It doesn't change anything about your application that's on the waiting list. It doesn't knock you to the bottom. It doesn't make you reapply. It doesn't do anything like that, because we want people to live where they want to live, right? We would just simply keep you on the waiting list. If people are interested in being referred, we send their referral to the property with the name and phone number of the potential tenant that is eligible for the unit, so that they reach out and have the person come in and complete the application process at the site of the property. This has been going on, like I said, since 2007. We've had our online waiting list now for almost 2 years. It kicked off on June 1st of 2015, and we continue to create enhancements within that system to ensure that we're matching people to exactly where we want to go. The latest thing that we're working on adding is even deeper dive into the accessibility features that people need, so that we make sure, because sometimes people select sometimes that they need a physically accessible unit, when what they mean is they can't walk up and down 4 flights of stairs every time they go in and out of their apartment, but they may not be a chair user or have the need for a roll-in shower or cutouts or some of the other features that are truly physical accessibility. So we're trying to refine those, because those units are hard to find. Units with auditory or visual or physical accessibility features are hard to find, especially affordable ones. So we want to make sure that we're matching people to the resources that they need, and not putting people in units that really have more features than what they need, and thereby leaving somebody else out of the opportunity to live there. One of the things that we are able to do because of a second program that we help manage through our waiting list. It's called Section 811 Project-Based Rental Subsidies. That's a program that the Illinois Housing Development Authority, the Illinois Department of Human Services, the Department on Aging, and the Department of Healthcare and Family Services went together and applied to the Department of Housing and Urban Development for some money in order to make affordable for a disabled population rental subsidies that are placed on specific units throughout the state. And this was an effort by the federal government in order to open up or create more opportunities for what a lot of folks would call the Olmstead population. So 1999, the federal Supreme Court did the Olmstead ruling that said that people with disabilities had the right to live in the least restrictive setting possible, even if the state was paying for the services that helped that person to lead the successful life that they wanted to lead. So this kicked off in 1999. Most states didn't do a lot about it proactively, including Illinois, not surprisingly. A few years back, we were charged in 3 Olmstead-related class action lawsuits. And the one that you guys probably know the most about is the LIGAS class action lawsuit for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so these resources are to help us in Illinois move people from institutional settings into the community. And the LIGAS class is the only class that is eligible for these rental subsidies as PUNS list class members, right? Rather than having to be specifically institutionalized in an intermediate care facility for the developmentally disabled. So, you know, under LIGAS, there's 2 classes, subgroups. Those are folks that live in ICFDDs or folks that are on the PUNS list waiting to be selected for service. So you guys, the LIGAS class members, are the only people that are in the community at large that are eligible for Section 811 resources at this point. When I came to the state 3 years ago, it was pretty clear that we weren't going to be able to actually assist anybody in accessing these 811 resources that was involved in the intellectual and developmental disability service world, because we didn't have a service package that was set up in order to actually access these units and get the support we needed. Because we had basically the 24-hour service package of SILA, 24-hour SILA services, and we have home-based services. And so the problem is, which traditionally home-based are usually around 15 hours a week of service that you're getting. Kind of depends upon what you choose to pay, right, the people that you hired. But, you know, the problem was between like 168 hours a week, which is 24 hours times 7, maybe, close to it, if I didn't multiply right, and the 15 hours. So we all know there's a lot of room in the middle, right, for different levels of service that I might need in order to access and live my best life integrated in my community of choice, right? So we began working with the Division of Developmental Disabilities to make this a true option for people. The Division has come out now with 4 different pieces of what they call communication bulletins or informational bulletins. They're not super easy to find on the DHS website, but if you look up informational bulletins, that you should be able to find them, but you have a list of what these specific ones are. The first one is really important because it clarified there's a little used or not very often used definition of intermittent SILA, which is less intensive service than a 24-hour SILA. And there was a misunderstanding in the community that the cap on hours for intermittent SILA was 15 hours a week. And so the first thing that the division did was put out this clarification bulletin saying that was not the maximum amount of hours within intermittent SILA setting, but it was the minimum amount of hours in the SILA setting, and that what hours people were awarded within intermittent SILA for support should be based on what the person's personal need is, right? What their person-centered plan calls for and what their need for support is. So that was the first very important thing that happened in June of 2015. Then we got, in April of 2016, we got some clarification on SILA family or person's own home. So one of the things about regular SILA is that the consumer, the tenant, gives up and doesn't get their Social Security disability payment to themselves. It goes to the provider in order for them to provide the SILA-based home residential type things that can't be paid for by Medicaid, because Medicaid doesn't pay rent. They would have to give up their income, and it would go to the property, and then they get back like $50 a month in order to meet their personal care needs and what they want to do with that money. Well, that's a problem if I'm trying to access a rental subsidy, because that means I can't, because I don't have any income, and my income goes to pay my rent technically to the SILA provider. So this piece of clarification was really important to talk about how we could have a SILA setting that would be person-controlled, a person's own home, SILA, my own apartment, that I would then have my Social Security come directly to me. I would be able to receive financial and budgeting services within my services package, and I would be able to access the affordability of a rental subsidy or other affordable housing option. So that was the second really important thing. The third piece of clarification came out as a draft and had so many comments from the community at large that they've been working on assimilating those comments into a final version. But we have had people still be able to use this and receive the services in the way that this is mentioned. So this is really kind of super complicated, and but there were some complicated ways that if you got more than 15 hours of service per week that you had to bill for those hours. And it was really complicated for everyone. It was complicated for the provider and for the tenant and for the family, and so this just clarified that we were going to design a rate, a service rate, based on the number of hours that a person needs and is approved for. And so that's really important because it just makes it more possible for providers to say, yes, I will do this type of service. The fourth and final piece of informational bulletins that came out just recently in July of 2016 was the increase in behavioral intervention and treatment hours. And so those treatment hours have been increased from the opportunity to get 66 hours a year to 104 hours a year. And so that just, again, helps if a person needs some assistance in settling into the community and living on their own. These are some additional hours that might be able to help with that process underneath behavioral intervention and treatment options. So I can't show it to you because we didn't work this out ahead of time. But if you look up or Google on YouTube "A Choice to Succeed," which is on this slide here, there's a video that is from a group of LIGUS class members who are in the Edwardsville area. They're in the Metro East area. They began working. They were most of them, not all of them. So there was a family group that met together. Their children had grown up together in the school system and in participating in the community. Their children were adults, 20 to 30 years old, some 20 to 35, basically. Had lived a very much more inclusive life than many people who of an older generation with disabilities had been allowed to live. And when they were selected from the PUNS list, they didn't want any of the services that were available. They didn't want to, excuse me, they didn't want to give up their freedom and their choices in the life that they had designed for themselves during the daytime to go into a 24-hour SILA where you have much less choice at this particular moment on what you do with your day and how you're doing. Now we're changing. We're moving into lots of changes within the DD system that is going to help with that. But at the time, they were selected, most of them, in the first PUNS poll that happened. So they didn't want to choose those. They didn't want to choose home-based service because I'm an aging parent of a 20 to 35-year-old. I'm not going to be here forever for my child to stay with me. What's home-based is nice and it's great, and it's flexible, and I can, choose the type of services that I want and pay what I want, but it oftentimes is not enough hours to support a person on their own in their own individual apartment or sharing with a roommate. So that some people it is, and some people it's just not. And so they didn't want to choose either one of those. So they began meeting with all of the service providers in the community area where they lived. I mean, all of them. I mean, like they had people from everywhere come in and talk to them. And this began like 4 years ago when they were selected. So they had meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings. And, everybody was like, no, we can't do that. It doesn't work. It won't work in our funding. We can't do, anything different. And there was one service provider that kind of stuck with them and kept saying, we're willing to explore. We can think about what we're doing. Right about the time that they had been meeting for about a year or having these conversations for about a year, I was able to connect with them and really quickly figured out as they raked me over the coals about what they wanted and what the state had promised them many times, right? We often promise things and are not great at making sure that they really happen. That there was a property in their community that was under construction that would just be perfect. It was by a running trail. It was on the transportation line. It was right next to shopping. It was, kind of in downtown. It was just the perfect spot, and it was under construction now. They knew that. They drove by it every day. They're like, if we could have access to something like that, this would be totally work. And as I drove home from that initial meeting with them, I realized, well, I kind of realized whenever they said it, that this was a property that was the Illinois Housing Development Authority funded property, and that we might have access to be able to make sure that people would get access to those units through the statewide referral network, because there were SRN units in that property. So we began working with the division to come to what could be the service package that folks could access. And that's where these informational bulletins came from. So over a period of probably another year and a half, with lots of frustration and many times that, you thought the whole thing was dead. We were actually able to finally come to it, and last spring, the group of 6 people from this group moved into a building that had affordable units for them. We have 5 units. One couple shares a 2-bedroom unit, and then 4 people have their own individual units scattered throughout a property that is very nice. And in this video, there's information about the consumers and their parents and them talking about what it means to them and how the Public Housing Authority, who was a partner and was people that helped build this property, and all the pieces that went into that. So it's kind of a fun, it's about 5-minute video, and it's nice to see what the possibility is. So far, we've had about 19 people that are Ligas class members. 19 people that are Ligas class members that have accessed statewide referral network or Section 11 units across the state. That's not a huge number, but it continues to increase, and it all depends upon what you're asking for and what you're looking for. As you think about what it is that your loved one wants to do with their life and how they want to live their life as they are getting ready to transition into adulthood, you really need to think about what is it that is the way that we want to live moving into the future. And it doesn't mean that it has to be tomorrow that somebody is going to move into a unit, because again, these are limited resources, so you're going to get on a waiting list for a multitude of these affordable housing options, and your plan could be in 3 years we want to have the opportunity to move into individual unit, or our plan is we want to find someone that we're interested in having a roommate, and we want to find the right roommate, and then make sure that we're going to move into a property that will have 2 bedrooms so that we can share an apartment. Many of us, I know my first apartments were always shared because of affordability, right? So it's not an uncommon thing to do, and that's totally different than sharing a 4-bedroom home with 8 people, right? Having a 2-bedroom apartment where I have a lease, both of us have a lease, we have rights of tenancy, those kinds of things. The challenge when you think about roommates that you need to keep in mind is that if you put 2 people together, income that Social Security disability, you'll stay underneath the 30% of area median income cap. You start to add in the third person, and you usually will go over area median income for a 3-person household, okay? So you have to be careful about that when you're thinking about roommate options. Many people with the intellectual or developmental disability are able to draw a higher amount of Social Security because of their they're pulling off of their parents or other folks. So you have to kind of keep that in mind, you know, in the back of your mind as you're thinking about the potential for roommates, but there is definitely the potential for roommates. I put up here, I kind of put together like a bullet point that I didn't send out before about the supportive housing options, or SHOW, SHO, because we are showing how people with intellectual and developmental disabilities can live in the community. I ran off about 100 because I wasn't sure how many were going to be here, and I didn't send it prior, so you can pick that up if you like. I could talk about this stuff for a long time, but I don't want to get into the weeds. I want to answer questions that people are interested in knowing about. I also, as they mentioned in my bio, do help oversee the Employment First initiative at the state of Illinois. So I would push back and say you definitely need to ask the DRS for everything that you need, because we are working on making that possible within the WIOA and vocational rehab changes that have come into effect. A person with high support needs is eligible to have a VR case, a voc rehab case, opened at the age of 14. And it is not a standard practice, and we are working towards how to improve that system. So I know that it's very easy to get overwhelmed and challenged by our complicated systems, but without parents and advocates who push for the change that we are trying to work towards, it will never happen. So please, think about ways that you can continue to assist in that process. If you come into any situation where you don't feel like you're getting the answers that you need, please always feel free to email me or give me a call, and we will try to push from the inside. I do work in the secretary's office, so sometimes that helps with the other divisions, and it is, an opportunity to continue to grow the system. We have a federal grant from the Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy for Employment First related changes. We're working on culture change from the inside, because our internal culture has to change, our provider culture has to change, and the expectations of consumers and parents has to change, so that we are able to move into a much more integrated employment and housing opportunity. And I will just say that the Division of Developmental Disabilities has their adults with disabilities, Medicaid with developmental disabilities, Medicaid waiver that is getting ready to be in the renewal process. And within that waiver, we have requested supported employment individual support service definitions, quite a bunch of them, that will change and add, lots of job coaching, discovery, job readiness, all that kind of stuff that they talk about underneath customized employment. We don't call it customized employment in the Division of Developmental Disability as much, but it's basically the same thing. It's supported employment with individual supports. So instead of a group setting at day training, I'm going to work on being in the community, and we have those definitions in the waiver, and we'll hope for approval. And I would assume that CMS will be happy to approve those as long as we have answered all their questions about how that's going to be implemented and how we're going to make sure that we incentivize those services by paying a good rate. Then we will be able to begin rolling out those services as they're approved. Then providers will have to train their staff that are going to deliver those services. We have to work on building community capacity, and then we'll slowly have people hopefully select to receive those services in addition to or instead of day training options. So that's just a little smidge about what is going on, you know, in the employment first kind of realm that we're trying to work on also. So I'd be happy, I have no idea what time it is, but I'd be happy to, you know, try to answer any questions that you have. And if there are, you know, like specific situational things that we don't need to talk about in front of everybody, we can either talk about it afterwards or you can email me or give me a call.
Okay, raise your hand and I'll get the mic to you. Okay. How does one access this? I mean, you mentioned that parents or individuals don't self.
Yep. So we recommend that you work with your individual service coordination entity to get on to our statewide referral network or 811 list.
Can you explain what that is? They don't know what you're talking about on ISC.
Oh, the individual service coordination entities, or some people call them ISAs, or that's the planning. That's where you get on the PUNS list, right? Oh, you guys are lucky. If it's CAU, they're the best. They're the best ISC in the state. It's where you go to get on PUNS and where you go to do your planning around what kind of services you want. They're the people that will create a person-centered plan as we move forward with you and your child, loved one.
Have been shouting out, "What's PUNS?"
Oh yeah, prioritization of urgency of need for services. It's the non-waiting waiting list that we have for Medicaid services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities through Medicaid. That you're interested in housing options?
Yeah. So if, for example, our son is 19.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would do it now because you know, depending upon where he's interested in living and what the community area is and all that, you know, I mean, it could take some time to actually be selected and matched to a unit that is where he wants. And if he is matched and doesn't have the services, or it's not exactly where he wants to go, or it's not quite time yet, you can always say no and just stay on the list and wait for the next time to get matched. So it's never too soon. I also encourage people.
Even if you say no to them, it's not like it's going to affect.
Right. No, not at all. It does not at all affect your place on the statewide referral network or 811 waiting list. It is not at all. There's no punitive action if you say no. So to a unit. And let me just say really quickly that we encourage people that haven't been selected yet from the waiting list for service to go ahead if you're going to be interested in housing and get on the waiting list, because you know, it just was released yesterday. They're going to poll another 900 people in April and send out letters, as well as we have to, within the Ligas consent decree, work on let's see, well, how does it say? We have to have a reasonable pace for serving people off of our non-waiting list waiting list. I say that because you're not supposed to have a waiting list for Medicaid services, so that's why it's called a prioritization of urgency for need for service, or PUNS list instead of a waiting list. There's going to be people selected in April. There's going to be people ongoing. What happens if you end up in a crisis situation and are eligible for services because you're in a crisis situation, but you're not on the waiting list? So, you know, again, if you get selected for a match with a unit and you don't have the service package that you need at the time that you are selected, you can say no, and then there will be no punitive actions. But unless you get onto these waiting lists, you know, again, it's the affordable housing lottery, so you got to play to win.
I know we have a lot of questions, and we do have more time for questions, so I will get to you, I promise.
Mine's quick. I don't know if I should ask you later, but you mentioned employment first. My son's aged out of the system. He had a voc eval at the IRS. They said, because competitive employment is what they're talking about, they said he's not work ready, and they turned him down for any employment services. When you suggest I kind of to reconsider?
How long ago did that happen?
About a month.
About a month? So if you want to email me some specific information, if you'd be willing to share that, I'll see what I can do in terms of checking out the possibility of
I know it was through vocational employment, and they just, I guess, they don't consider him work ready in terms of competitive employment.
yeah.
That's
yeah.
the only thing they were considering.
Yeah, so send me some basic information. I'll see what I can do
Okay.
to help assist.
Other questions? Is there one in the back?
Yes. No, you're good?
Anyone else? Oh, hang on 1 second and I'll come to you.
With this home-based service, 15 hours per week, how do you get that?
The home-based service?
Yeah.
You have to be offered services off of the PUNS list. Also, you have to be selected from the PUNS list. So the home-based services is just a different program than the 24-hour SILA that's available underneath our Medicaid waiver and statutorily. So if you're got a transition age child that
It has to be transition age.
no. But I'm just saying, if you have anybody that has not been selected for service, who is not receiving state Medicaid-funded intellectual and developmental disability services, needs to be on the PUNS list that they access through the ISC so that they can be selected for service, and they can you can say that you want either home-based service or 24-hour SILA, or you want to be considered for both.
Okay, what kind of services would you get?
So if you look at, you can look up home. You can look up home. If you go to the DHS website and look up home base, you can see what the specific listings are. But it's basically a more flexible program because it doesn't have a housing component to it, a residential component to it. So it's based in usually the home where the recipient is residing, which oftentimes is a parental home, right? And you are able to select types of services that you want to do. You can either hire your own direct support staff that would be able to deliver that service, or you can work with an agency through them to hire a staff that would deliver those services. There are people that have done supported employment services, job coaching, and that kind of thing through it. You can do personal care things. You can do, you know, a variety of things, but you have a capped amount of money. So you people like the flexibility because you can hire who you want and you can pay more than what a direct support person gets in the other programs, but then you only have 2 times the federal Social Security wage to spend. So, you know, you have a capped amount of money, and so you can purchase that those services spread over, you know, the 52 weeks of the year, you know, divided into how much the money is, if that makes sense. So that's separate from what?
Social Security. SSI.
Yes, it's Medicaid money.
Can I just say, if you're unfamiliar, if the term PUNS means nothing to you, we need to talk.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
I'm not being funny. I want you to understand that you're not going to get any services in the state of Illinois if you are not on the PUNS waiting list. It's not going to happen, right?
Right.
So let's talk after. Depending on where you live, you either go into Community Alternative Limited, if that's to your local VISA, or wherever you live. But you have to get on the PUNS list. And I encourage you, even if you're saying today, oh, I don't need anything, get on the PUNS list. The poll that Lori's talking about of 900 people in the month of April, I just read it. It's really quite interesting this time that they're pulling. It's sort of, you never really know why you're pulled or what the criteria is, because it changes from poll to poll. But this particular poll is based on who's been on the list the longest in the highest level of need categories. So if you don't get on it today, you're at the bottom of the list and you're going to, you know, potentially wait longer. You need to get on PUNS. So come up and talk to us after. We'll help you. Like Lori said, there's SILA funding through PUNS. There's home-based waiver funding through PUNS, and there's also home services, which is different than home-based. So
right.
Everything's got a little bit different thing, but let's talk after, because I hate, you know, I know a lot of people are already on PUNS and you've heard it and done it. So let's talk after, okay?
was just going to ask, I have students who have PUNS cases and then students who we refer to DRS. So for my students that we refer to DRS, if their families wanted to access the Illinois housing, they have to open PUNS cases no matter what?
So supportive housing is affordable housing plus the services and supports you need, and it's usually not employment services that are going to support you in your housing, right? So if a person truly needs supportive housing, so that support is the part, right? And so. And the key too is just because I have a DRS open case doesn't mean that I might not need services after the time frame that I can have a DRS open case. I might need ongoing job coaching, which they can't pay for, past a certain amount of time, at DRS. So I would make sure that they, even if they have and are referred to DRS and have open cases, that you also put them on the PUNS list if they need service. If they're going to need that ongoing support. If they don't need that, then they probably don't need supportive housing. They might need affordable housing, which you could still go to, like the public housing authorities, waiting lists, and those other pieces. But supportive housing is kind of a niche kind of housing for folks that are going to need ongoing support in order to be supported in the community within their own individual unit.
Mm-hmm. And just for families out here that are wondering about PUNS, usually the school district in which your student attends on parent night or your school district will find a night where a PUNS person can come out and talk to families so you know more about it. So if you still have a student in school, even if they're in the transition program, 18 to 22 years old, talk to the transition program or your high school to see about how to have PUNS reps come out and talk to your school districts for your families.
It just brought to my attention that there's a PUNS night on April 10th.
We're sold out.
Oh, they're sold out.
Oh, no.
You need to schedule them. But we try to put it on the Connected Community website. Whenever we hear about a PUNS registration night, we try to put it on our website. Just go to the events page from time to time and see. Because they do them all the time. They're all scary enough.
We'll have another one in the fall. But in the meantime, even if you call Community Alternatives and tell them where you live, the school districts will schedule all throughout the year. And so call Community Alternatives and tell them where you live, and they may say when the PUNS night, the nearest PUNS night is. I think Schaumburg had one a few weeks ago, and NSSED had one last month. So they're all year round. So just make sure that you call them and tell them where you live. And I didn't mention that because we're sold out.
But since everyone's here, you can get us in, right? I'm just asking.
Yeah.
We'll talk. If we get you Hamilton tickets. Okay. I see a question in the back, and then I'll get back to you.
I think there might be a conflict of interest if you give her Hamilton tickets.
I have a question about how so my son gets home-based services.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay. I think he's had him for 4 years.
Okay.
At some point, we're going to need supportive housing for him.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go from home-based services to
a higher level of support? Mm-hmm.
Do you have to go back on the PUNS?
Technically, you're supposed to be able to, all of us change, right? And so you're supposed to be able to respond to those changes, but it's much easier to go down from a 24-hour cell service to home-based service than it is to go up. Technically at this point, I believe the division tells people that if they have home-based and they are interested in 24-hour, quote unquote, then they should be on the PUNS list for 24 hours. But, if you work with CAU, I have found that they are very good at, if there is an affordable housing option available to a person, in writing the documentation to request an increase in hours or a change to what we would call intermittent SILA kind of special, the show that hours based on what the individual person needs, based on having access to a housing resource, aging parents, change in. I didn't mean anything by that. I'm aging too. I see everybody, they're whispering back there. See, she's saying we're old. No, I'm just saying that is part of that is part of the concern, right? When you have home base, is that I'm not going to be here forever, So what's going to happen? So if you work with CAU, they're really good at writing things, and we work with them really closely a lot in terms of trying to do things and advocate for hours. So if you think that that's going to be something that's of interest in the next couple years, I'd get on the list, and then then as you get selected and matched to a unit, you have some more powerful leverage to use with the division when you request things, because you have access to a resource, and then it doesn't become a crisis case for them whenever, God forbid, something does happen, and then your child then ends up in a place that you've worked your whole life not to have them be in because of the crisis. So let's serve people before there's a crisis, and then it costs less, and it's better for the person in what they choose.
So we do get.
I can't hear, so can you give her that back? Put me on the list. I'm sorry, I don't hear well. I'm sorry.
We do have services through CAU. And a person from CAU who comes 4 times a year, whatever. So would that be the?
Yep. Tell them you want to get on the SRN waiting list.
It's a similar question. For the people who's getting the home basic, and also as option for doing using the housing, is that reversible, or once you go to one program, is the end?
So let me see if I can clarify the question. So is the question, if you move into housing and you don't feel it's successful, does that harm you in any way? Are you going to lose services on the service side? Is that kind of the question?
So if I try to go to the housing and sellers, and then of course the home basic funding will be gone. But once the seller is not working well, go back to the home. Will that home basic?
You can always reduce the number of the services that you're getting. Let's say let me give you 2 scenarios. One is home-based services are enough for your loved one to be able to live in their own unit. If that's the case, which it has been for people that have accessed our units, not all of them, but some of them, you just don't even need to change services, right? You just use the home-based services that you have in a different environment, not your home, in your loved one's own home, when they access the unit, affordable unit. 2, if you do need additional hours in order to access that unit, and you get moved up to intermittent SILA from home base, you can always reduce hours down. They'll let you all day long go from 24-hour intermittent SILA down to home base, because that's less hours and less expensive. It's the moving up that's the harder thing to do, although still possible. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Basically, yes. It is basically reversible.
Hang on 1 second.
I think she was asking that if you got through all those hoops and you get into a 24-hour or intermittent SILA and it doesn't work out, can you automatically reinstitute your home-based funding?
Yeah, so what I'm saying is you can always go down to if you have a higher level of service, either 24-hour intermittent SILA services and the housing unit, you feel like it didn't work out, you feel like it's not good, you can always ask the Division of Developmental Disabilities through your ISC agency to go back to home-based services, and hopefully CAU people, I am telling the truth. I'm saying the division is usually pleased to spend less money than more money, so they're much more apt. Now, I can't tell you how quickly the process happens, right? But it has happened, it does happen whenever people seek to, like, maybe they've moved out, you feel like it didn't work out, you're gonna move back home, you just need home-based services, then you can request that to happen.
I just wanted to comment, I might be the only one here in DuPage County, but if anyone in DuPage County, the PATH agency is day one PATH.
Oh yeah, that's right. And they have not been as active with our waiting list, and I'm very happy to have any of you encourage them to give me a call.
Anybody on this side before I head to that side? You guys are making me work. No?
There, did you?
Okay.
You sure?
I have a question. I have two sons with disabilities, 16 and 18, and my 18-year-old's gonna be 19, and he's on the CAU, and I understand all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also took on my brother's problems. He's 55 years old.
Okay.
And my CAU person had said, oh, she gave me another CAU person, and she had asked me, well, go ahead and talk to them. And I'm trying to get my brother funding, but I need to find proof that he was, you know,
Right, has a disability. Right, right.
He's 55. He went to minor school. I went to District 214. There's no records. How do I mean, that's my deadline right now with my. That's not a question.
Yeah.
Where could I start?
That's a good question.
I mean, my son's 81 years old. He lives with her, and so I'm
Yeah.
in the process of
Right, trying to plan for, right,
you know,
right.
in the near future. And,
Right.
That's been my dead end.
So somebody from,
I mean, I would just think, Chris, that you could have them evaluated.
We
And
did
then-
for Social Security, because I just got him Medicaid,
Right.
got him Social Security, I got him all that stuff, but it was, he's intellectual disability, but they keep telling me from CIU, we need stuff from way back when. He's got a letter from Access back in 1982 or something. That's not good. I don't know, well, it's the kids, you know. My mom doesn't have
And the
anything.
district doesn't have that, obviously.
Huh?
The district has nothing, like.
We went to Rolling Meadows, I went there, then I went to 214, and they said, I'm just like, I don't know where else to go. Anything else?
I've heard sometimes in these cases, kind of young might be able to help. I don't know for sure, but another family I know went through them, and they were at least able to refer them to some resources to help them when they didn't have documentation.
Right.
You might want to reach out to them. I don't know.
We tried doctors who are no longer
living? Yeah.
I guess I'm really confused by the history needed because we're familiar that Social Security and Medicaid are horrible.
They're pretty hard. Yeah, if you got that, that's about the.
But CAU says we need more documentation that he's disabled, and he was growing up with it.
Is it the before 22 thing? You know, I mean, yeah.
Back then,
Right.
just you were
Yeah, because I might be able to prove I'm disabled now, but do I meet the, because to be a person with intellectual or developmental disability, I have to be diagnosed before I turn 22, right?